have here in the studio with someone who knows about weather all over the world, not just around the country, because he's been pretty much in every country in the world with the port operations. We're talking about R Gonzalez, the Vice President for Asia and the Pacific of the International Container Terminal Services Incorporated, or ICTSI. We'll talk about how the regional integration in Southeast Asia, or ASEAN, will affect their port operations. Now, they have many port terminals in the Philippines, as you know, but more than 24 all over the world as well. Christian, thanks for joining us here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here so early. Are you one of those guys who wakes up in the morning and, okay, which city am I in?
Well, not quite. No matter where I am, I'm generally up by 4.
Because you have ports in Africa, you have ports in Europe, you have ports in the Americas, and of course, right here in the Asia-Pacific region. Let's talk about ASEAN. Let's get serious. Curiously, a couple of days ago, Manny Pangilinan saying that Philippines is not ready for ASEAN integration. He has his reasons for that, saying that it's a hot-button political issue, and he doesn't think that national leaders would actually go the full mile. Your take on ASEAN integration, are we ready?
Well, I tend to agree with him from a readiness point of view. But from our own corporate opinion, it's something that needs to happen and that will happen. And there are advantages to us specifically, because ASEAN integration basically means you have a free flow of trade, or theoretically you have a free flow of trade, services, capital, and labor. If you look at it from our point of view, you effectively would then be allowed, take the free flow of labor. Part of the labor that can be moved around, so long as you meet certain regulatory hurdles, are engineers. We could then start using our engineers all over the place. We're in Indonesia, we're in Brunei, we're obviously in the Philippines.
Of course, whether we like it or not, ASEAN integration will happen because we've committed to that as a country. It's just a matter of time. The upside, of course, would be increased amount of volume of trade.
Well, not initially. So let me go back to what I was saying. So services is beneficial. Obviously, the free flow of capital is beneficial. Free flow of trade,
which is what your business is.
Yes, correct. Take this cup, right? If you're buying this cup now from call it Spain, and then you decide, well, I'm going to buy the cup now from Malaysia because duties have come down, barriers have come down. It's still going to come in, whatever container the cups are coming in. So your amount of trade initially actually doesn't rise.
What does a substitution?
It's a cheaper substitution. So cheaper duties and taxes, probably cheaper prices, and more importantly, cheaper freight.
So you don't see bigger business for the ports?
You do later on, because once these cheaper, more competitive goods start coming in from the Malaysias, the Indonesias, the Vietnams, Myanmar, wherever else, you then have a situation where purchasing power goes up, because people are spending less on the product, which means they consume more, which is what then drives.
So it's not going to happen overnight, but down the road we're going to see an increase in trade volume, and of course more containers coming into our ports all over the country. Of course, the downside, of course, is, are we ready for this increased volume in trade? I mean, let's talk about capacity of our ports in Manila, Manila, for example.
Manila, from a pure port perspective, is fine. Particularly our terminal, we can expand as far out as we want. I mean, it's just a matter of reclaiming and putting the money in, which we're certainly willing to do. The problem is with any supply chain, logistics chain, you need the corresponding infrastructure from point A to point B.
Including a road network, of course.
Precisely. And including the water network, the marine side of it. If the government doesn't dredge and keep Manila Bay deep, if they don't keep the roads wide enough or build new roads, it's pointless to expand the capacity.
ICTSI is ready for expansion, but you're afraid that government will have to do its part as well.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is in line with what Secretary Singson has been saying about infrastructure spending on roads, and what a lot of people, particularly in the media, have been saying about what the next president should focus on.
Well, everyone's been talking about it for sure, but is anything happening on the ground? Are we seeing plans for road network, for these trucks to pass freely without affecting, of course, congesting the metro?
Like ASEAN integration, there are regulatory and bureaucratic hurdles to infrastructure development. Take the NAIA Expressway with the right-of-way, the Port Connector Road, which actually is in progress, and extensions of that are in the feasibility stages. The Metro Pacific, talking about Manny Pangilinan, is looking very seriously into that. If you kind of look at being able to sidestep some of these hurdles, that infrastructure will come. How quickly these hurdles can be sidestepped is a different.
But this will have to be something taken seriously. I mean,
for sure.
Otherwise, it's all shallow talk to talk about integration if we're not preparing the necessary infrastructure. But just to be clear, you're saying that infrastructure of our ports, we're ready for this. In Manila.
In Manila.
In Manila,
yes.
Is that the government will have to do its part in terms of
road network.
The road network.
Exactly.
Let's talk about other parts of the country, because you're saying Manila is ready for integration. Okay, just a matter of the government pitching in to build the road network. You have Indonesia, Malaysia in the south, of course, and of course the logical entry port for these goods would be in Mindanao, okay, or in the Visayas. Let's talk about Davao. I think you have a port in Cagayan de Oro as well.
Yes.
Are these ready for integration?
What is more difficult in these areas is not necessarily well Davao, a PPP is occurring right now for the development and rehabilitation of SASA. But take Cagayan de Oro. There are two ports in Cagayan de Oro. One which is a FIBIDEC port, which is what we operate. The other one is the national government PPA port, which needs a bit of rehabilitation. But from a capacity point of view, they're okay. We're going to need to get our customs standards sorted out nationwide. Computerization and improvements in how trade is managed from a, again, regulatory point of view. The Customs Modernization Act is being discussed now in the House and the Senate, and this will come out soon. And I believe that this covers a lot of the concerns that people have in relation to customs in places, in these outports that you have.
You mentioned about a PPP process going on in Davao, in SASA. If you were to put your money on an alternate port, not just to decongest Manila, okay, but really to build an alternate hub for logistics, where would that be? Is Davao the place to put it? The government feels that Davao is the place to put it.
Well, look, Mindanao is going to be one of the fastest growing and most important economic engines for the country. That's for sure.
Okay.
Now, the thing about Davao in comparison to Manila is the bulk of the business going in there now or coming out of there now is export driven.
Okay.
It's not so as consumption driven as Manila.
It's not imports, right? These would be exports.
Yeah. So there is a question on why we would be spending money on rehabilitating a port that's a couple of kilometers from the airport, right next to a national road that's right next to the city center. It may have made more sense to do this outside. Now, I'm also an advocate for keeping logistics simple and not reinventing the wheel. And if you do have the marine facilities already there, okay, sure, no problem.
Of course, let's be clear. I mean, you operate a port in Davao as well.
Yes, we do. And in fact, we have a very well located private port outside of Davao.
But despite that, you feel that Davao may not be the opportune place to modernize and spend $20 billion worth of
20 billion pesos.
20 billion pesos.
Yeah.
And where would it be then?
For Mindanao? Well, certainly outside of the Davao city center, that's for sure. I think the Davao area is still the right target for a Mindanao hub, but Mindanao also is so big. You need to look at it that way. And do you have the road network to get from Davao to northwest Mindanao or to northeast Mindanao? Not really.
Right.
So Cagayan de Oro is still going to have to be a viable alternative option.
So just like everything else, you can't modernize just the port itself.
No.
You have to modernize the whole national infrastructure and transport network. Well, let's pull back a bit and look at the region as a whole, okay? The ASEAN region and integration. Last I checked, we have limitations in the Constitution. We only have a 60-40 equity position for foreign ownership. So how are we going to harmonize that, ASEAN integration, and the fact that we have all these local regulations and constitutional provisions in place?
I think the House is working on some amendments now that would allow or that would put certain clauses into law that would then allow the lifting of the 60-40 rule for certain in certain industries if it was in the national interest. Now, until that's done,
but that's something you would welcome, of course, foreign ownership.
Certainly, because then it opens up foreign ownership in places like Indonesia, where it
works both ways.
Precisely. And look, I mean, we have thrived on competition all around the world. I think what makes ICTSI and what makes Filipinos great actually is that when the going gets tough, you start really producing. And going back to ASEAN integration and the comments that have been made around the media about businesses coming in and other citizens coming in and taking jobs and taking market share away, I think the opposite is going to happen. We're going to have to get our act together and say, look, it's time to innovate, it's time to work harder, it's time to really put our businesses on the global scale. And when we take that attitude, I think we will become far more successful than people think, and far more competitive.
Using that attitude, of course, which you've done successfully. I mean, you have ports in places some people don't even know where to locate on the map. Madagascar,
Fun to travel
Ecuador. You have in Africa. You have in Georgia.
Yes.
Hot spots like Iraq. Would you believe that? Let's turn the tables around, using that mindset, using that outlook. What emerging economies or what emerging areas of ASEAN would be for you perfect for ICTSI to get into?
We're very keen on continuing to look in Indonesia.
You already have ports in Indonesia.
We do, not with the control that we would like.
Okay.
Specifically because of some of these regulatory hurdles we've been speaking about. ASEAN integration would open the door for that. Indonesia, as I said, Cambodia, Myanmar. But I think, again, tying it to our discussion earlier on SASA, the governments and ASEAN need to be practical about this. If you want a highly competitive port, a highly competitive logistics system, it's one thing to have competition that drives innovation and efficiency and all of that. It's another thing to have too much competition. You don't want to be in a market where you have, call it 500,000 containers and 10 container terminals.
Right.
Because nobody's going to make money. And what's going to happen is nobody's going to invest. People are going to get lazy. People are just going to try to break even. You're not going to get the returns, the returns for the general public, because you're not getting the returns for the private investor.
Or just quickly to end this conversation, you've been quoted before, and I saw this in an article. The Philippines has a super sexy economy.
It does, yeah.
Interesting way of putting it. What do you mean by that?
Well, from our perspective, look, call it 110 million people, rising middle class, consumption is growing because of that rising middle class and that population. Workforce is growing. With the growing workforce, that's another thing about the ASEAN integration. We have a 6.4 unemployment rate today, but when a lot of this population gets into the working age, what's going to happen to that unemployment rate? ASEAN integration gives us opportunities outside. And opportunities closer to home, right? Nurses don't have to go to Canada and the UK and all of this.
Interesting times ahead indeed. Christian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks very much. Good morning.
Christian Gonzalez, Vice President for Asia Pacific of ICTSI.